I wanted to share this story because it stands out so starkly to me. There's only one person I've met in my life that I'm absolutely positive was a psychopath, and it happened to be a child. The summer after I graduated college, I was living in a house in Berkeley, California, with a few PhD students. It wasn't the best neighborhood, but it wasn't the worst either. There were families living in the neighborhood, including the people in the house next to us. It seemed like a reasonably nice 2-story home, but on several occasions, there were police cars and/or ambulances outside of this house. We never really questioned why, as police cars weren't a rare sight in the area, and we had only ever seen a young girl and her mom in the house, so there was nothing overtly abnormal or concerning. One afternoon, my roommates and I had just finished smoking a joint in our backyard when we hear a knock at the door. I open it, and it happens to be the mother from next door. I was a bit taken aback, and even more so when she says, "Hi, I wanted to ask you guys something. I really don't want to have to call the police." At this point, I'm thinking she must have seen or smelled us smoking weed, and while it was Berkeley, it technically hadn't been legalized yet. So I'm thinking we need to apologize and talk our way out of some trouble. But then I noticed this woman is visibly shaking. She was clearly terrified and said, "I just don't know what to do. I'm having a situation with my daughter, and I really just need another adult to be there." My roommate Sean and I immediately agreed to go with her, while my other roommates look on, incredibly confused by whatever the hell is going on. This mother is asking some stone students to be adults. I figure she must truly be desperate for help. Sean and I walk over there with her, and she explains that her daughter has some issues, which are currently manifesting as her standing on the roof of their house, threatening to drop her mom's work computer off the edge, or simply jump off herself. Wow, just got super real. Sure enough, we walk up the driveway to the house, and there's this kid standing on the roof of their 2-story home, dangling a MacBook Pro over the side. She's saying in this disturbing, sing-songy voice, "Look, Mommy, no hands. No hands, Mommy. No hands." Sean and I immediately make eye contact with each other, because we're both creeped the f*** out. This doesn't seem to be a normal kid. The way she's speaking reminds me of the twins from The Shining. She's not crying and doesn't seem even remotely distressed. On the contrary, even. It appears she's enjoying this torment of her mother, like it's some kind of sick game to her. The mom starts explaining to us that her daughter has had issues like this for many years. She has a psychiatrist and a therapist, and the mother has called both of them. They recommended calling the police, but the mother has been through this quite a few times before and doesn't want the child to go through the ordeal of being restrained and taken into the hospital yet again. She's frightened and exhausted and doesn't know what to do. So I just start talking to the kid. I tell her about how I used to love climbing on the roof of my house, and now I'm into rock climbing, and I bet that she would love that too. Besides, it's much safer than climbing around the edge of a roof if you make sure you use the proper gear and safety precautions. And the fact that she's so unsafe right now is really scaring her mom. I told her if she climbs down, I'd be happy to talk to her more about climbing, as well as show her the pet geckos we have that literally climb up the walls. I'm just pulling things out of my ass at this point. I have no idea what to say or how to mediate a situation like this. I'm just trying to diffuse the tension and get her to come down. She's flat out ignoring me at first, continuing to taunt her mom. But eventually, she seems to get bored or irritated with my attempts to engage her. She turns around and climbs back towards the window where she got out onto the roof. She runs down the stairs and out to meet us, then says in the same weirdly sing-songy, fake, "Come play with us, Danny," voice, "I dropped your computer on the roof and now it's broken. I'm sorry, Mommy. Do you forgive me?" There was zero actual remorse whatsoever in her voice. It sounded so disturbing and manipulative, I was blown away that it was coming from a 10-year-old girl, and not some demon child from a horror movie. The mother is still shaking and looks plainly overwhelmed, so I offer to go up and get her computer from the roof. She agrees and escorts me through the house, up the stairs with her daughter trailing behind. It appears to be a perfectly normal and well-maintained middle-class home, by the way. The little girl is clearly irritated with me spoiling her game and repeatedly orders me to leave. I ignore her, climb out the window onto the roof, and the laptop is sitting by a gutter seemingly unscathed. I climb back through and hand it to the mother. At this point, the girl realized her bluff was called and skipped off to her room. Mom proceeds to explain to me that this whole thing was triggered by her changing the password to her laptop after the girl logged into it, stole her mother's credit card, and ordered over $2,000 worth of stuff. This girl is freaking 10 years old. Apparently, she's been pulling shit like this her entire life, and no one understands why. They had to move the girl's younger sibling into a separate apartment with her father because they were afraid she would hurt him. The mom was crying at this point, saying they really tried their best to get her the help she needs, and they're just at their wits' end. I did my best to reassure her. I gave her my phone number and told her to contact me if she needs help in the future. At this point, Sean and I noped the fuck out of there after that and went back to our own house. That mother never contacted me, and we eventually moved out a few months later. That was the extent of my interactions with this young girl. Although I think about that mother every now and again. I wonder what the next months held for them, the next years, and if they ever found a resolution to why she was acting out in such a way. My best educated guess? They never did. And that little girl, who is now an adult, has probably found her way into some much more malicious type of activities. I'm a 24-year-old guy who works in housing on a college campus. One other piece of information about me that will probably be important for this. I'm bisexual. One night during the school year, I started chatting with someone on a hookup app. He was talking about how he had never hooked up with a guy and wanted to try it, but was a little bit nervous. I told him that I would be willing to help him out. I'd let him take the lead, but totally understood if he wasn't ready yet. His profile said that he was 4 miles away and was 23 years old, so it more than surprised me when he told me that he lived on campus. Against my better judgment, I agreed to still go hang out with him. The first red flag that I for some reason missed was the way he talked about what I had assumed was his room. He kept calling it a room instead of his room, and he even originally stated it as he knew a place that we could hook up. I did question him about it, and he never really gave me a solid answer. Although at the time, I didn't think much of it. These next parts, I really didn't think of as red flags either, only until afterwards. When I got to his room, the living room and kitchen were completely empty. There were 4 bedrooms in the apartment, and he led me to the third one. I had noticed the 4th bedroom had a light on, but the door was closed. Taking into account all of his actions leading up to this, I assumed that he was closeted, and maybe just curious. I was surprised he was inviting me over when his roommate was clearly home. As I followed him into his room, I noticed that it looked pretty bare. Nothing on the walls, not much stuff in there. There were sheets on the bed, and a few other random things around the room, but that was it. I hardly had time to process the bareness of the room when he turned around to me and said, "I don't think I can do this." I told him there that there were no worries, and that if he changed his mind, to hit me up. Well, about a month or so later, at the end of the semester, we did health and safety checks. In my position, we usually don't do them. We have the RAs do them. But we were low on staff that day, so the extra help was needed. The room where the above event happened just so happened to be one of the rooms that I had to check. The apartment at this point was completely empty. On the documentation sheet that we used, it said that the apartment was vacant, which could have just meant the occupants had moved out. But out of curiosity, and the fact that I was starting to get the creeps for some reason, I checked our database, only to find out that there was no one assigned to the room that past semester, meaning no one was supposed to be living in that room at all. I have absolutely no explanations to how this guy got into the room, or what his actual intentions were, or really what the whole thing was about at all. I reckon it's something I'll never know, but it still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. Did I dodge something sketchy that night? Or did I avoid something much more sinister? What was the actual intent of having me come up to that room? And how did that guy, and whoever he may have been with, gotten in there in the first place? Trust your gut feelings, everyone. I didn't have any that night. And the red flags that I'm examining now, I'm lucky that I'm not in a position that I sorely wish I would have noticed them then. This is the story of a coworker I had a long time ago. So I can look back on it and laugh now, but at the time, it was really distressing for me. To give a little background, every summer I would do some temp work for the company where my dad worked. It was an education company, so they always needed temp workers around July and August, which was the time for all the exam remarks that they had come in. It was data entry work, but it suited me fine, and it meant I could earn a little extra cash while I was at university. I did this every summer from when I was 19 right through to when I was 23. And then I got another job at the same company for a bit after I graduated, but we'll get to that later. For now, all you need to know is that I was a reasonably familiar face there, and everyone knew that I was my dad's daughter. The main downside of working there was that I'd clock off work at 5 p.m., but I'd have to wait for my dad to finish work, since he was the head of an entire department, so he'd end up staying a bit later. Every day, I'd bring a book with me and sit in this little foyer area between his department and the department where I worked, since it had the most comfortable chairs. I must have been 22 years old when this happened, because it was the penultimate summer that I worked there. I had just cut my hair short for the first time in my life, and I'd also dyed it red as well. I was sitting on these couches reading when all of a sudden this guy approaches me. Let's call him Leon. He tells me that he works in my dad's department and he thought he'd come introduce himself. This was a pretty common occurrence for me, and I was aware of this guy. He was young and decent looking, so a few of the women in my department had a crush on him. I was dating someone at the time though, and I had never actually seen him in person, but I could see what they saw in him. We got to chatting, and he mentioned that I'd changed my hair. So I told him about cutting it short, and he cut me off mid-sentence. And this is where it started to get weird. He said, "No, first it was brown, and you didn't have a fringe. Then you went through that phase of curling it. Then you got the fringe and dyed it red. After that, you dyed it purple. Now you've had it cut short and dyed it back to red." This guy that I had just met was describing over 2 years worth of hairstyle changes that I'd had. I felt creeped out, but he seemed like a nice enough guy, and I guess I'd worked at the company throughout that entire time, so it was reasonable to assume that he'd noticed me before. That should have been my first red flag. He asked me if I had Facebook, and I told him that I did, so he said that he would add me there. That seemed pretty much normal. But then, after he'd sent the friend request, he asked me to get my phone out so he could watch me accept the friend request. I'm British, and it's therefore impossible for me to be impolite. So I got my phone out and showed him that I had accepted it. I thought that might calm him down. Bear in mind, he wasn't a bad-looking guy, so I did feel a bit flattered at this point that he was so keen on me. That sense of flattery dissolved real fast. After the Facebook thing, He kept asking me if I had MSN, and I told him that I didn't. I swear, throughout this conversation, he asked me if I had MSN about 4 times. Then the final time he asked, he was like, "Can you please get MSN so we can chat after work?" It was like he had something really urgent that he wanted to tell me, but I had only just met this person. I kind of laughed and told him how I hadn't used MSN since I was a teenager, without necessarily rejecting him. Then he said something like, "Well, if you don't have MSN, then do you have Skype?" This seemed like the perfect opportunity to bring up my boyfriend, who was a foreign student and went back to his home country during the summer. He was the only person I spoke to on Skype. I said to Leon about how I didn't have my own Skype account, but I used my dad's Skype account to talk to my boyfriend. I really thought this might ward him off. I was wrong. Without missing a beat, he said, "Can you please just get your own Skype account so we can video chat after work?" He said it like I was somehow inconveniencing him, like this was something we'd agreed to do months ago or something. I had no idea how to react, so I just sort of smiled and laughed. Thank the heavens, someone from my dad's department walked past at that very moment and was like, "Leon, aren't you meant to be at your desk?" He scurried off pretty quickly after that, but not before reminding me to get my own Skype account and to send him the details. I told my dad about this whole exchange in the car ride home, but all he said was that Leon was very friendly and that a lot of women in his department liked him. So maybe I had just misunderstood the situation. I thought he was probably right, so I tried not to let it bother me. Later that evening, though, I was on my computer doing schoolwork when a message popped up on my Facebook. It was Leon. All the message said was, "We like the same movies." I don't know what it was, but something about this message freaked me out so very much. I decided not to respond and logged off Facebook, hoping that he wouldn't notice that I had been online. The next day, after work, I was sat in my usual spot when Leon comes over to me. His face was like thunder. At first, I thought he was just having a bad day and was walking through the hallway, but my heart dropped when I realized he was walking directly towards me. "Why didn't you respond to my Facebook message?" I was stunned. How was I supposed to respond to that? Who says stuff like that in real life? Lucky for me, I didn't have an opportunity to respond because he started off on this tirade. I kid you not. He started listing all of the movies we had in common that he had seen on my Facebook profile. The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Fight Club. I just sat there watching him reel off all these film titles. Once he was finished, he didn't wait for a reply. He just simply said, "It's okay, I forgive you," and then walked off back to his department. Over the next couple of weeks, he came and found me in my spot every day and talked at me from the moment I sat down to the moment that my dad came to get me. I don't remember many of the other exchanges, but I do remember distinctly one day pretending to pick my nose when I saw him coming, to see if that would put him off. But it didn't. It got to the point where I'd get so stressed out after work that I'd go and hide in the toilets for as long as I could. But the women I worked with started to notice and think that I was weird. Eventually, I broached the subject with my dad, and he gave me his car keys after my shift so that I'd be able to go hide out in his car rather than anywhere in the building. So one day I'm camped out in the car, and I'm still feeling quite a bit tense. But after about 20 minutes, I start to feel myself relax. Surely Leon won't come out looking for me, right? Wrong. I look over at the main entrance, and my heart plummets. He's coming out of the door, and he's scrutinizing all of the cars. I sank down as far as possible into the seat, but I wasn't fast enough, and he saw me. He comes rushing over, starts tapping on the glass, so I opened the door to ask him what's up. I didn't see you in your usual spot, but luckily the doorman told me he saw you come out here. Why are you in your dad's car? Again, what are you even supposed to say to that? I told him that I had a headache, so I came out to the car to take some Tylenol and see if I could get some sleep. At least he respected that, because he told me to feel better, and then left me alone. I breathed a heavy sigh of relief, knowing that I was only going to be working there for a few more days before I had to head back to school. I told my dad about the car incident, and he gave Leon a talking to the next day. Leon would still come find me in the foyer, but he'd only talk to me for a few minutes in passing before leaving me alone. It was actually a big relief. On my last day of work there, I was fully expecting him to do something crazy, but he didn't even come to chat with me that day. I left the office and thought that I would never see him again. I found out later that he was fired not long after I left the company because he kept coming into work late and then spent most of his time at work chatting with his coworkers. And me, apparently. Fast forward to January of 2014. I was preparing to move to China for a position teaching English. I had graduated from school and I was working at the same company, but this time in a semi-permanent capacity. It was my last day at work once again, so I received quite a few gifts and some fuss from my coworkers. It was about 10 a.m. when who should I see walk through the door but Leon. He had been hired as a temp to do the job that I had done for so many years. As soon as he walked through the door, he saw me and this flash of recognition crossed his face. I wanted to slide under my desk and die right there. He came walking over to me and was all smiles, asking about how I was and what I was still doing at the company. It was at this point that one of my coworkers mentioned about how I was off to China soon. Leon seized on that and started talking about his friend, who was also interested in teaching English abroad. His interest seemed genuine, so I got to talking about my qualification, who I got my credential through, what company I was going to be working for out in China. We chatted for maybe 20 minutes, and he wrote down some details for his friend. Then he went off to work. At the end of the day, I was packing all of my stuff to leave, and a few of my coworkers were coming over to say their goodbyes. Don't get me wrong, the Leon incident aside, I had a wonderful time working at that company and I made a lot of great friends, some of whom I'm still close with today. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Leon approaching, but I think, what's the harm? He says goodbye and wishes me luck on my new adventure. Then, as I'm literally one step out the door of the department, I hear him call out, "See you in China." For the first 2 weeks of my teacher training over there, I was like a hawk, keeping a constant lookout for this guy. Thankfully, he never did follow me out to China. But this, and everything around it, remains one of the creepiest encounters of my life.